Welcome back, welcome back. He is part of Britain's theatrical royalty, but equally admired all over the world for his science fiction characters in Star Trek and X-Men. I am talking, of course, about Sir Patrick Stewart, who is now playing a character he knows so well that he refers to him as a friend. The friend is William Shakespeare. The play Bingo was written by the Marxist playwright Edward Bond in 1973. It portrays the later troubled years of Shakespeare's life. Patrick, welcome. When it portrays the later years that were troubled and so on and so on, is that all true? Has he checked that out, or has he imagined it?
Yes, Edward has done his research. We know approximately when William Shakespeare left London and returned to live in the second largest house in Stratford-on-Avon, which he had bought some years previously, where his wife, Anne, had lived all her life. And we know that during that time, leading up to his death in 1616, we don't know that he ever went back to London, but we do know that he signed one piece of paper, a document which aligned him with the landowners, the wealthy, rich landowners around Stratford-on-Avon, in their attempt to enclose areas of common land, which was devastating for the poor who had always used that common land for grazing and for growing crops. Shakespeare sided with the businessmen. Now, this is a contradiction with the man who wrote in King Lear, "Poor naked wretches, wheresoe'er you are," etc., etc. I have taken too little care of this. So on that contradiction, Edward Bond has created this imagined last year of Shakespeare's life.
I see. And you, meanwhile, have acted in 28 out of 37 Shakespeare plays.
I think it's 28, yes. Some of them many times. Tempest I've been in 5 times.
And in fact, the play you're doing now, you've been in 4 times.
Yes. It's one of the charms about being a stage actor as opposed to a film and television actor, that you can return to work. And if the work is good enough, it supports a re-examination. And if it's Shakespeare, of course it's good enough. I fell in love with Edward Bond's play when I saw John Gielgud play this role on the Royal Court stage, I think in 1976. I thought it was a marvelous, disturbing piece of work, and because it was about the man who I had fallen in love with as a teenager, William Shakespeare, I determined that at one point I would play it. The Royal Shakespeare Company did a production in Stratford. We actually were performing the play about 300 yards away from where the action of the play takes place, which had a certain charm about it. And we took it to London, to the Warehouse, which has now become the Donmar. And now, some, I don't know what, 30 years later, we did it at Chichester 2 years ago, and I wanted us to bring it into the Young Vic. I've always admired that theatre and its work and its audience particularly. And when David Land, the artistic director, had a space, he put us in here 2 years after the Chichester production closed.
I see, and so you're into the 4th and more to come. And of the Shakespeare plays that you haven't done yet, which would you most like to do?
Well, I think I've been in most of the plays that have characters I still want to play. The very top of my list is Falstaff in the Henry IV plays, but I've been in the Henry IV plays. I played Henry IV, I played smaller characters. I would, there are other roles that people don't conventionally think of me as being suitable for, roles like Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream, Dogberry in Much Ado About Nothing. These are supporting roles, comedy characters. Yeah. I find comedy, as I get older, much more attractive than you know, agonizing and you know, I've played a lot of hysterical neurotics in my time, and I am finding now there is much more pleasure and satisfaction to be got out of making people laugh. But then, of course, you see, that's very much where your career started.
Yes,
you were making people laugh.
That's right. That was the week that was, and we mixed in some current affairs as well, and it went from there. But but it is a joy, and it is. I can't surf because I'm really a non-swimmer. But I often feel when you get laughs from an audience, it's like surfing, really, because you ride on the laughter to the next words. And
the audience's laughter becomes part of the performance. I went to see James Corden in Man with Two Governors, and watching James, who is so gifted at this, riding the laughter in the audience, gives you exactly that feeling. It's an excellent analogy.
You regard him now as a friend.
Well,
Shakespeare.
I've spent more time with him than I have with anybody else in my life. An enlightened English teacher, Cecil Dormand, at my secondary modern school, put a copy of The Merchant of Venice into my hand when I was 12 and had me read it out loud. And although I didn't understand much of it, I always felt comfortable with it. Shakespeare never intimidated me, even though I was not academic in any way at all. That language and those characters resonated for me at once. And over the years, 28 plays, repeated productions of some of those plays, I feel I've got to know this man well. So although there is little biographic detail about William Shakespeare, I think, as some other artist once said, you want to know who I am, you look at my work. I feel the same with Shakespeare, that a feeling, a sense of who the man is emerges through his plays. And sometimes they're contradictory, but life is contradictory.
Yeah. But if, although you sort of go along with the Edward Bond, particularly in the latter days of Shakespeare, you would be therefore now amazed if someone found documents that proved that he was a licentious, libido-packed guy living a fantastic life through to the age of 82. I mean, that would come as a shock to you. You're convinced that's not Shakespeare.
Well, no, not so, David. I would be happy for him if I found that he'd had a good life, perhaps a more enjoyable life than we see from Edward's depiction of him. The fact is, we don't know. He did, after all, create those riotous characters in the Boar's Head Tavern in Eastcheap in Henry IV, with Falstaff and Bardolph and Mistress Quickly and Pistol and so forth. That's a life that he must have known. I don't think you can invent that without having tasted it.
And then you moved on to another stage in your life, of course, with science fiction. Now, is there a particular challenge, a particular difficulty in convincing people to watch and be moved or excited by science fiction? Is it a completely different genre?
In a sense, it's not. And it was in the early months of filming Star Trek that I came to realize this. There is about science fiction and the way it is written a certain heightened quality. For instance, I could recognize Star Trek dialogue set in amongst any other kind of dialogue because it has a tone to it. It's not entirely naturalistic, and of course the same could be said of Shakespeare too. So there is an ever so slightly presentational aspect, certainly to how Star Trek, and I think X-Men too, was written and performed. And I think that it helped me in making the captain a three-dimensional character, that I was already accustomed to giving life to slightly unnatural, non-natural dialogue.
Yeah. Was it as enjoyable as Shakespeare? But it's just so different, isn't it, really?
I had a lot of fun shooting that series. Much of it to do, with the role that I played. There's nothing quite, it's good to be king. So I sat in the captain's chair and I had a lot of interesting and exciting things to do. But it was made most of all enjoyable by the company of my fellow actors. There were 8 of us who were fine actors and delightful people. And the marvelous thing after 25 years is that they are all still among my closest friends.
Is it more difficult, science fiction, than Shakespeare, or is it a completely different talent, a skill required?
I don't think so. Again, we found when we had guests, which we would with every episode, and there were 178 of them in all, that actors who came on the show who had had a stage background also felt at home with Star Trek dialogue and the kind of situations they found themselves in, than actors who had exclusively done naturalistic film and television. There's the one area where it's challenging, and that is in the area of blue screen and green screen, where you don't have an alien to act with. You just have a cross on a stand, and you're having to deliver dialogue with somebody else reading in off camera, or you're having to imagine an environment that you're in. We had 3 sound stages at Paramount, and stage 16 was affectionately known by us as Planet Hell, because it was there that all the alien environments were created. So it was filled with smoke, with water, with sand, you know. It was generally uncomfortable. But often we would be filming against green screen or blue screen, and having to imagine where we were rather than being in a naturalistic setting.
And now you've taken on at least one other role that perhaps means as much to you as any of the ones we've been discussing. And that's Refuge, where you're now the patron. And you're the patron not just because it is a worthwhile charity, which it is, but because it speaks to your own life so much.
Yes, to my childhood, certainly. I'm actually co-patron with Sherry Blair. We worked together with the organization. My childhood was at times chaotic and unpredictable, and occasionally a little dangerous. Less for me than it was for my mother. I had a father who was astonishing, charismatic character, had finished his war service in 1945 as Regimental Sergeant Major of the Parachute Regiment. So he had been a superstar, and he came back to civilian life and really nothing. He was working for the rest of his life in semi-skilled work. Well, that's an awful crash landing. And it depressed him. And he became a weekend alcoholic. So Monday through Friday, life was absolutely regular and secure, but at weekends it got a bit dangerous.
Right, and the violence that we're thinking of that happened here didn't happen during the week, only when he was drunk at a weekend?
No. It was always connected to alcohol, and on a Friday evening at about 7 o'clock, my father would start drinking and would drink until Sunday night. Not in the house, but he would go to the pub or the club. And one of my earliest memories is lying in bed, listening for the songs my father would be singing as he walked up the street. Because if he would be singing, "I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen," that was a good sign. If he was singing anything at all military, it was not a good thing. It meant that he was angry and upset. My mother was on the receiving end of his anger and his violence, so I saw ugly things and frightening things happen from the age of 6 onwards.
And of course you couldn't,
nothing I could do.
At 6 or 7 or 8, intervene. Really.
Well, you learn skills which no child should ever have to learn, and that is how to gauge the temperature of what is happening in the room, so that the moment at which the violence is about to begin, you can attempt to intervene or do something to stop it. And that's one of the skills that I learned. There's not much that I could do. Occasionally I was successful, but you know, I grew up, this passed, my father got old and tired, and I finally came to the point where I could talk to people about these childhood experiences. And that's the one great thing about living in Los Angeles. There are brilliant therapists there, and I was helped to explore these childhood experiences and to come to terms with them. And then when I was approached by Refuge, by Sandra Hawley, who is the director of Refuge, because she had heard of my history, I saw it as the perfect opportunity to make some use of my celebrity status in a way that was directly connected to my experience. And as I've said before, I'm on record as saying that fundamentally I'm doing it for my mother, because there was not much I could do for her then.
And who died first? Did you have a reconciliation, a let it all hang out conversation with your father?
No.
Or was that absolutely impossible and he died too soon?
My mother died first, he died 3 years later, very lonely. I think he was rather looking forward to being on his own, and when he was, he found he didn't like it very much. No, there was never that. You have to understand that in addition to this man, the weekend drinker, there was a charming, charismatic storyteller. You know, he should have been an actor. And of course, I came to accept that that's probably where I got some of my skills from. He was a delightfully entertaining, garrulous individual, handsome, and there were people who simply would not believe that this other aspect of his personality existed, because they only knew the charmer.
Right. Was it possible for, even with the violence and so on, do you think, or do you know, that your mother still loved him despite the violence, or not?
Yes. We tried to give her, my brothers and I had two older brothers, I was the youngest, give her opportunities to leave, and she always refused them. She loved him and did not want to be separated from him.
And that was not finally affected even by the...
Nope. No. And that is one of the things that I have learned through talking with Sandra at Refuge, talking with the counselors and advisors. Refuge, I should just quickly say, provides a listening post and an actual bolt hole, an escape hole for women and children, usually women and children, though we do know there is violence against men in some relationships too, but it's pretty rare. Refuge gives them somewhere to go, to be safe and secure.
Well, that's vital, isn't it? Because going back to the story of your own life, you say there was literally nothing. There was nobody to contact, nobody to communicate with, even in a small area. Just an occasional bit of help from Mrs. Dixon.
Oh, yes, yes, Mrs. Dixon, who was, like my mother, a weaver, but she was a big, powerful woman, and there were times she would just crash into our living room, and she had these huge forearms, and she would put them under my father's face and say, come on, try it on with me, she would say, and very sensibly he always backed off. Lizzie Dixon, formidable woman. Now there's a person I would have liked to thank, because there were times when she got us out of a lot of bad mess. But it wasn't just that there was nowhere for my mother and the children to go. Even the authorities were unsympathetic, to the point of often holding my mother responsible for the violence that had happened. The police, doctors and so forth.
Saying she must have provoked it in some way.
Exactly.
When she hadn't, but that was an old-fashioned view about men and women, wasn't it, in fact, in those days, which today also, not the loneliness, because there are things like Refuge to come in and make people no longer lonely and so on, but that old-fashioned view was really prevalent there. Well, we must return to all of this, because all of it is so fascinating, and so can we make a date to continue? And thank you very much, and good luck with the play. How long will it go on for?
We have another month after this. We close at the Young Vic on the 31st of March.
Right. Well, you have your notification there, friends. You've got until the end of March, and if you're watching us right now in Kuala Lumpur, that may take a little more difficulty to make it by March the 31st. But as for now, thank you for everything so far, Patrick. Thank you.
David, I've enjoyed this immensely. Thank you for inviting me.
Has the US lost its influence in the Middle East? Why is it failing to adapt to the unfolding events and power shifts? Are the old approaches to foreign policy now outdated? And how will or should the US regain authority in the region? Former US Ambassador to both Egypt and then Israel, Daniel Kurtzer, joins me now to discuss America's future in the region. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Very good to have you with us. Is the perception that America has lost part of its kinetic or potential energy in the Middle East true at the moment, compared with when you were last there in Israel as ambassador?
I think it is true. The perception is that the United States, having lost many of its traditional allies in this Arab uprising, the Arab Spring, is now fumbling around looking for a policy that might work. We've backed away from the pursuit of an Arab-Israeli peace process, and we're not quite sure what to do next. It doesn't mean that this is a foregone conclusion forever, but I think the United States does need to reorient itself in order to move forward.
Yes, because you were one of the key contributors to the speech in Egypt made by President Obama, weren't you, and so on, and a lot of the things mentioned in there have not really taken off yet. Huh?
That's right. I think there's some disappointment that the president who came in amidst such high hopes really hasn't fulfilled them. Certainly, he has not repeated the mistakes of his predecessor, George W. Bush. But on the other hand, one is hard-pressed to see any movement forward, particularly in the Arab-Israeli dimension, but also with respect to the kind of vacillation of the United States in supporting the Arab Spring.
Yes, they weren't sure which way to go on that.
Exactly.
Was it good news, in fact? Should America be seeing the Arab Spring as good news or not?
Well, it certainly is good news,
in human rights terms,
at least potentially.
Yeah.
You know, we as the UK and others have been asking for the promotion of democracy and expansion of freedom for many, many years. I don't think many of us expected it to happen the way it did, and we became accustomed to the stability provided by the autocrats. So it has taken some time to adjust to this new reality.
And settlements. You've often spoken of settlements, and we've lost out on settlements, the rest of the world, in a way, hasn't it? Israel's prevailed, and why did America let them get away with it? I mean, America is so powerful in Israel, theoretically anyway.
I think it's a sad story that goes on for many years. Israel is very short-sighted in pursuit of a settlements policy. The belief that somehow by promoting settlements and talking about peace that this will work, that just doesn't work. And the United States, which does have some leverage over Israel, has never really exercised that leverage. So we're in a very challenging time in which the Prime Minister of Israel is pursuing a kind of unstoppable settlements push, and that is driving Palestinians and others away from the pursuit of a peace process.
Yes, I mean, do you think he's waiting, the President is planning to do more if and when he wins the next election?
Well,
is he not wanting to, is he wanting to keep the Jewish vote on his side, at least till then?
I think some of his calculation now is electoral, not all of it, but some of it is. His numbers in the last election were quite high in the Jewish community. About 78% supported the president, and that's down to probably under 60% now. And as you know, the Jewish vote in specific states like New York, Ohio, and Florida becomes quite important. So some of it is electoral. I think it's also a question that the president believes, especially last May when he gave a speech and offered some ideas on how to move forward, and that speech was rebuffed. I think the president has reached a point where he needs some time to rethink his approach, and therefore it's possible, and some of us hope, that should he get reelected, he would start out more strongly in support of an active approach to peace.
And what about the situation in Iran? I mean, is it inevitable that there'll be, for instance, an Israeli attack, probably not a US attack, but an Israeli attack on Iran in the foreseeable future?
I don't know if it's inevitable, but I take seriously the statements made by the Prime Minister and by Defense Minister Ehud Barak that they will not allow that program to proceed. So there is a chance now for diplomacy. There may be another meeting soon, either in Istanbul or elsewhere. And I think given the fact that sanctions are starting to bite a little bit, there may be some incentives on the part of Iran to approach these talks a little more seriously. I do hope the engagement this time is not a one-off, but rather sustained in a manner that slows down the program and gives diplomacy a chance.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Thank you, Sir David.
Thank you indeed. That's all we've got time for this week. My thanks to all of our guests. Do join us again in 7 days' time for another Frost Over the World. For now, goodbye for now.